The moment the gunshots echoed, the entire neighborhood froze. A little girl collapsed beside her German shepherd, her tiny hands shaking as she pressed against his bleeding chest. "Ranger, please don't die," she cried, her voice breaking in a way that made even bystanders step back in horror. Two cops stood stunned, their guns still pointed, realizing too late they had just shot the only thing standing between the girl and a real threat. But what terrified them more wasn't the screaming child. It was the man sprinting toward her, a man whose name was whispered in enemy camps, a man who had ended wars alone, a man no police department wanted to anger, because the girl they just traumatized was the daughter of the most lethal Delta Force commander alive. What she did next would shock an entire police force and change her life forever. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The quiet suburban morning shattered with a sound no child should ever hear: gunfire. A scream followed, high-pitched and trembling, echoing down the peaceful street lined with trimmed lawns and neatly parked bicycles. Neighbors froze at their windows. Dogs barked. The world seemed to stop for a single horrifying second. On the sidewalk, barefoot and shaking, 6-year-old Emily fell to her knees beside the massive German shepherd lying motionless on the pavement. Her tiny hands trembled as they pressed against his fur, now wet and warm with blood. "Ranger, Ranger, please wake up," she sobbed, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her dirt-streaked cheeks. 10 feet away, 2 police officers stood frozen, their guns still raised, horrified by what they had just done. Their chests rose and fell with frantic breaths, adrenaline still surging, confusion clouding their eyes. "Stay back from the animal," one officer shouted, but even he sounded unsure, his voice shaking. Emily didn't move. She leaned over Ranger protectively, wrapping her small arms around his neck, refusing to let go. "He saved me," she cried. "He was helping me. Please, don't hurt him again." The officers exchanged stunned glances, their faces paling as realization crept in. Moments earlier, they had arrived responding to a vague call about a hostile dog chasing a child. They didn't see what happened before. They didn't see Ranger leap between Emily and the fleeing suspect who had sprinted through the neighborhood. All they saw was a large dog and a terrified girl, and they fired. Now, as neighbors poured out of their houses, phones already recording, the officers felt the weight of a mistake heavier than anything they had trained for. Voices rose. People shouted. Some yelled at the cops. Others gasped at the bleeding dog. Emily's cries cut through everything. "He was my friend. He was my hero. Please, someone help him." But as chaos erupted around them, the officers still had no idea who the little girl belonged to, or the storm that was already on its way, because the man racing toward this scene was the most lethal Delta Force commander alive. Emily could barely breathe through her sobs. Her tiny chest heaved as she leaned over Ranger, her fingers trembling as they brushed through his fur, desperate to feel any sign of movement. "Ranger, please don't leave me," she whispered, her voice shaking so hard the words barely formed. You promised you'd always protect me." The dog's ear twitched weakly, the faintest response, and Emily broke into another choking sob. She pressed her forehead against his, tears dripping onto his muzzle. "I'm right here," she whispered. "I won't leave you. I won't let them take you." Behind her, the officers stood frozen, caught between fear, regret, and the scrutiny of dozens of eyes now recording their every breath. Neighbors gathered in clusters, voices rising in anger. "You shot a dog protecting a child. He was saving her. Someone call an ambulance." But Emily didn't hear any of it. Her world had shrunk to the warm, wounded body lying beneath her shaking hands. One of the officers took a hesitant step forward. "Little girl, please move away from the animal. We need to secure—" "No!" Emily screamed, her voice raw. She wrapped her arms tighter around Ranger, shielding him with her small frame. "Don't touch him. You already hurt him." The officer froze, his partner's face crumpled in dread. "We didn't know," he muttered. "We didn't know he was protecting her." Ranger let out a weak, painful whine. Emily's voice softened instantly. "It's okay," she murmured, stroking his head with trembling fingers. "Daddy's coming. Just hold on, please. Just hold on for me." Her whispered promise drifted through the chaotic street like a fragile thread of hope. And far away her father was already running harder than he ever had in his life. Miles away, deep inside a restricted military training facility, Commander Mason Halley was sprinting up a rock incline, sweat streaking down his face, his breath steady and controlled. Around him, elite operators pushed through grueling drills, but Mason moved like a man carved from something harder than instinct, sharper than discipline. Then his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. Almost. But when he saw the caller, eyed Emily, his heart stuttered. His daughter never called during training hours. He answered instantly. "Emily, sweetheart? What's wrong?" What he heard on the other end stopped him colder than enemy gunfire. Sobs, shaking breaths. A tiny voice trembling like it was fighting for air. "Daddy. They hurt Ranger." Mason froze mid-step. The world fell silent around him. Even his heartbeat seemed to hesitate. Double quotes, "Emily, listen to me," he said, his voice suddenly low, controlled, terrifyingly calm, the tone his team recognized as the moment right before something deadly happened. "Who hurt Ranger? Are you safe? Tell Daddy where you are. I'm on the street. He saved me. And the police. They shot him." Every operator around Mason saw the change. His shoulders straightened. His eyes sharpened. His jaw locked with a force that could crack bone. This wasn't fear. This was the fury of a man who had led missions across continents, dismantled terror cells, rescued hostages from nightmares, and was known among enemies by a name whispered like a curse. Delta. Force called him Ghost Hound because once he was after you, there was no escape. "Stay right there, sweetheart," Mason said, his voice now a deadly promise disguised as comfort. "Daddy's coming. I'm almost there. Don't leave Ranger. Do you hear me? Yes. Please hurry." The line went quiet. Mason didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He was already running faster than any man had a right to run toward the one scene he feared more than enemy fire. His little girl crying beside a dying dog. Shot by the very people meant to protect her. The crowd felt him before they saw him. A strange stillness rippled through the neighborhood as Mason Halley turned the corner. his boots striking the pavement with a rhythm too controlled, too precise to belong to an ordinary man. He wasn't in uniform, just a dark t-shirt, cargo pants, and the kind of expression that made soldiers straighten their spines without knowing why. Neighbors parted instinctively. The officers stiffened, unsure of what they were reacting to, only that something dangerous had entered their vicinity. Emily looked up first. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mason dropped to his knees beside her without a word. His hands, steady, trained, lethal, gently touched her cheeks, brushing her tears away. Then he looked down at Ranger. The breath he took was sharp, controlled. Too controlled. The dog's fur was matted with blood, his breathing shallow, his body trembling. Mason slid one arm under Ranger's neck, the other under his torso, assessing damage the way he'd once examined wounded soldiers on battlefields. "Stay with me, boy," he murmured. Only then did he lift his eyes to the officers. The air thickened. The two policemen stood frozen, their hands still hovering near their holsters, their faces pale and rigid. Something about Mason, his posture, his eyes, the quiet rage radiating off him, made every instinct in their bodies scream that they had made a fatal mistake. "Sir, we can explain," the first officer stuttered. Mason didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply stared. And somehow that was worse. "How many shots?" he asked, his voice deep and calm, a voice that belonged in war rooms, not suburban streets. "2. Sir," the officer said. Mason's jaw clenched. Emily clutched his sleeve. "Daddy, Ranger saved me. They didn't see. They shot him before he could move." The officers swallowed hard. The cameras recording every moment burned hotter. Mason slowly stood, Ranger's blood on his hands. Emily pressed against his side. He didn't need to introduce himself. Every instinct the officers had told them exactly who he was, a man the world feared. And they had just wounded what he loved. Just minutes before the gunshots echoed through the neighborhood, the day had been painfully normal. Emily had been skipping down the sidewalk, her pink backpack bouncing with each step, while Ranger trotted beside her, alert, watchful, loyal as ever. He never strayed more than a foot from her side. Not since the day he'd been retired from the police K-9 unit and given to Mason's daughter as a protector. And today he sensed danger long before anyone else. It started with a sound, soft, hurried footsteps behind them. Ranger's ears flicked. His muscles tightened. Emily noticed nothing. She was humming her favorite lullaby. But Ranger's eyes locked onto a man emerging from between two houses, his hood pulled low, a glint of metal in his hand. The man moved fast. Ranger moved faster. With a deep, ferocious bark, he lunged between Emily and the stranger. Teeth bared, fur bristling. The man cursed and stumbled back, almost dropping the object he held, something metallic, something sharp. Ranger growled, pushing Emily behind him, his body forming a living shield. "Ranger? What's wrong?" Emily whispered, frightened by the sudden change. The man didn't answer. He turned and bolted. But Ranger didn't chase him. Not with Emily exposed. Instead, he backed her toward the open street, each step slow, careful, protective. His ears stayed forward, tracking every sound. Emily clung to his fur, her breath trembling. That's when two police officers pulled onto the street. They saw a terrified girl, a barking dog, a fleeing man they never even noticed, and they made the worst assumption possible. "Ma'am, get away from the dog." An officer yelled. Emily tried to speak. "No, he's protecting." But the gunshots drowned her out. Ranger collapsed. Emily screamed, and by the time the officers reached her, the real threat had vanished into another yard. Slipping away unseen. Ranger had saved her again, but the price he paid was bleeding out on the pavement. The street was now a storm of voices, neighbors yelling, officers arguing, phones raised like a forest of accusing eyes. But Mason heard none of it. He stood completely still, Ranger bleeding out in his arms, Emily trembling against his side. His silence was more dangerous than shouting, sharp, cold, controlled. A neighbor approached cautiously, a young man holding his phone out with both hands. "Sir, I recorded everything. You should see this." Mason lifted his gaze. "Show me," he said. The man swallowed hard and pressed play. The video began with Emily walking happily, Ranger stepping alertly beside her. Then the hooded man appeared, clearly armed. The camera shook as Ranger lunged in front of Emily, barking, growling, shielding her. The stranger fled, and then the police car screeched around the corner. The officers jumped out before the vehicle fully stopped. Guns raised. Safety off. No warning. No assessment. Emily's voice came through the recording, small and terrified. "No. Stop, he's saving." 2 shots fired. Ranger hit the ground. The video stopped. Neighbors held their breath. Mason's jaw tightened until the muscles in his face trembled. His eyes darkened, not with rage, but with something far more terrifying: decision. He turned slowly toward the officers, his step steady, deliberate. Each movement felt like a countdown. The first officer backed away instinctively. "Sir, we thought there was a report. You fired at a moving target," Mason said quietly. "A dog positioned between a child and the open street. You didn't see the suspect behind them. You didn't verify. You didn't hesitate. You didn't protect." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every person listening felt the weight of his words. Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, is Ranger going to die?" The question cracked something inside him. Mason's eyes softened only for her. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart." Then he looked back at the officers, his expression turning to iron. "You two made a mistake," he said, stepping closer. "A mistake that almost cost my daughter her life." The truth hung in the air like a blade, and for the first time, the officers realized who they were standing in front of. Mason didn't waste another second. With one arm around Emily and the other cradling Ranger's limp body against his chest, he pushed through the crowd. People parted instantly. The officers stepped back. No one dared block his path. His face was set in stone, unreadable, unstoppable. Ranger's breathing was shallow. Each rise of his chest was slower than the last. Blood dripped steadily from the wound, leaving a trail on the pavement. "Stay with me, buddy," Mason whispered, his voice trembling in a way no soldier had ever heard from him. "You've survived worse. Don't you give up now." Emily held Ranger's paw, her voice breaking. "Daddy, he's getting colder." Mason's heart cracked. "We're getting him help," he said. "He's strong. Stronger than all of us." A neighbor ran to the curb. "I've got my car, take it." It's faster." Mason didn't hesitate. He climbed into the back seat with Ranger in his lap, Emily pressed at his side. The driver sped through traffic, ignoring lights, blasting the horn, people diving out of the way as the car tore down the road. Ranger whimpered faintly. Emily gasped. "Daddy, he's hurting." Mason lowered his forehead to Ranger's. "I know, boy. Hold on. Hold on a little longer." They reached the emergency veterinary hospital in minutes that felt like hours. Mason burst through the doors, gunshot wound. He roared, "He's fading now." The staff snapped into motion. Two vet techs rushed forward with a stretcher. Mason hesitated before laying Ranger down, his hand lingering on the dog's fur as if letting go would break him. Ranger's eyes flickered, open for half a second. He looked at Emily, then at Mason. As if saying, "I'm still trying." The vet pushed the stretcher toward the surgery room. "We'll do everything we can," she promised, but as the doors swung shut, cutting him off from Ranger, Mason felt something he hadn't felt in years. Helplessness. Emily slid her hand into his. "Daddy, is he going to die?" Mason stared at the closed doors, eyes burning. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The waiting room felt too small, too bright, too quiet. Emily sat curled against Mason's side, her tiny fingers clenched around his shirt. Outside the surgery doors, a red light glowed steady, unblinking, reminding him that Ranger was fighting for his life. But danger wasn't finished with them. Not even close. A sudden crash erupted outside the vet clinic, shouting. A car door slamming, heavy footsteps pounding across the pavement. Mason's instincts snapped to life. He rose instantly, positioning Emily behind him. Then he saw him, the hooded man, the same one Ranger had confronted. Sweat-covered, wild-eyed, clutching something metallic in his hand. Emily gasped. "Daddy, that's him." The suspect wasn't running anymore. He was looking for a hostage, or a shield, or revenge. Two police officers outside drew their weapons, but their hands shook. One shouted, "Drop it!" But the suspect didn't stop. He moved with the desperation of someone cornered. Mason stepped out of the doorway, calm as a shadow. "Emily," he murmured without turning. "Get behind the desk. Stay low." She obeyed instantly. The suspect spotted Mason and hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough for fear to flicker in his eyes, like he recognized the man standing before him. "You," the suspect snarled. "You're the reason." Mason didn't wait for the speech. He moved faster than the officers. Faster than the suspect. Faster than a man with that many scars had any right to move. In one fluid, terrifying motion, Mason closed the distance, grabbed the suspect's wrist, twisted the weapon free, and slammed him against the wall so hard the windows rattled. The suspect screamed in pain. "You targeted my daughter," Mason said, his voice cold enough to freeze air. "You threatened her life. And you made my dog bleed for it." I didn't know," the suspect cried out. "You knew enough to run." The officers stared in disbelief. None dared intervene. Mason tightened his grip. "Who sent you?" The suspect trembled. "I swear I was told to find the girl." "Your girl. You were the target. They want you gone." Silence fell. Emily peeked out from behind the desk. Trembling. Mason knew. This wasn't random. This was personal. And Ranger had sensed it from the start. The suspect's breath came in short, ragged bursts as Mason pinned him against the wall. The officers hovered nearby, unsure whether to step in or clear out. But no one dared interrupt the man who radiated more authority than their entire department combined. Mason leaned closer, his voice a quiet, surgical blade. "Who sent you? Speak." The suspect swallowed hard. I didn't want to do it. They forced me. Said you were the target, not the kid. Emily's tiny gasp echoed from behind the desk. Mason's jaw flexed. Why me? The man's eyes darted, panicked. He knew this wasn't someone you lied to. Because of the raid, he stammered. The one overseas. Months ago, you dismantled a whole network. Their leader Nasser Kadir, he survived. He wants revenge. On you, your family. Anyone close? The room fell painfully silent. Mason's grip tightened. You followed my daughter. He said she'd panic. Said you'd come running. That's when they'd strike. The suspect winced. I wasn't supposed to hurt her. I just needed to lure you out. But then, that dog attacked. Ranger. Mason's eyes hardened, the truth hitting him like a blow. Ranger hadn't acted out of fear. He had sensed danger instantly. He had placed himself between Emily and a man sent to harm her. Ranger had fought with everything he had and been shot for it. The suspect continued trembling. I swear, I never expected the cops to show up. I thought I had time. But when the dog charged me, I panicked. Mason slammed him harder against the wall, rage simmering beneath every breath. That dog saved my daughter's life. And you led gunfire straight to her. The suspect sobbed. Please, I told you everything I know. Kadir's men. They're here. In the city. He's planning something big. You need to protect your kid. Mason stepped back, releasing him just long enough for the officers to handcuff and drag him to the patrol car. Emily rushed out from behind the desk, clinging to Mason's leg. Daddy. Ranger stopped him. Ranger saved me. Mason knelt, pulling her close. I know, sweetheart, he whispered, voice breaking. And we're going to save him, too. But behind him, the surgery light still glowed red. Ranger was fighting alone. The hallway felt like it was shrinking with every passing second. Emily sat curled in Mason's lap, her little hand wrapped around his thumb, her eyes locked on the glowing red light above the surgery doors. It had been on for too long. Far too long. Mason tried to stay strong for her, but every minute carved deeper into him than any battlefield injury ever had. He could fight armies. He could outsmart terrorists. He could endure torture. But waiting to know if his daughter's dog, her protector, her friend would live, that was a different kind of agony. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Daddy, what if he doesn't wake up? Mason pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her head. Ranger has more heart than any soldier I've ever known. If anyone can survive, it's him. The red light blinked, then went dark. The doors swung open. A vet stepped out, removing her gloves. Her expression was unreadable at first, making Emily's grip tighten around Mason's shirt. Mason stood, every muscle locked. Tell me. The vet exhaled slow, relieved, tired. He made it, she said. It was close. but he pulled through. Emily's knees buckled with relief. A sob burst out of her, pure and overwhelming. Mason caught her instantly, lifting her into his arms as tears finally blurred his own vision. How long until we can see him?" Emily pleaded. The vet smiled softly. "Come with me." She led them into a quiet recovery room. Machines beeped softly, and there, lying on warm blankets, wrapped with bandages, eyes half closed from sedation, was Ranger. Emily rushed forward. "Ranger, Ranger, I'm here!" The German shepherd's ear twitched. His tail moved just once. Then, with effort, Ranger lifted his head an inch and looked straight at her. Emily burst into tears, hugging him gently. "I thought I lost you." Mason knelt beside them, placing his hand on Ranger's head. "You saved my daughter," he whispered. "And you saved me." A knock came from the doorway. The two officers stood there, hats off, eyes lowered. "Sir." "We're sorry," one said. "We acted too fast. We'll accept any consequence." Mason looked at them long. Heavy, then back at Ranger. "No consequence I give," he said quietly, "will ever be stronger than the lesson you've already learned." He stood and wrapped an arm around Emily. "Next time," Mason added, voice steel, "think before you shoot." Ranger let out a soft huff, as if agreeing. Emily smiled through her tears, and in that small hospital room, the bond between a girl, her father, and her dog felt unbreakable.